Good day everyone. Today we are going to discuss about the DFD, or what we call the data flow diagram. So last time we discussed about the entity relationship diagram and the entity relationship diagram optionality. So now may we focus on the data flow diagram, and to start with, may we answer the first question that was included here on our copy. So the question is, what is a data flow diagram? So we have a set of bullets here to answer the particular question. So may we read the first bullet. It says here that a data flow diagram is a traditional visual representation of the information flows within a particular system. Basically, data flow diagram has a similarity with the entity relationship diagram, but you have to understand this, that the data flow diagram uses the entity relationship diagram as its basis. Okay, so there is a particular word here that we need to emphasize. We have the word traditional. Why is it that the data flow diagram is a traditional visual representation? Because the data flow diagram was perceived as an outdated technique by some software engineers, but it is still most widely used requirements analysis notations. So even if it is traditional, or we may say it is outdated or it is old, it is still being used, especially in the representation or the visual representation of how data moves, or the information how the information flows within a particular system. Okay, same as the entity relationship diagram. The only difference between the DFD and then the ERD is that they use different notations and also the different symbols to represent the flow of data and also the processes. Okay, so may we proceed? It says here that a neat and clear DFD can depict the right amount of the system requirement graphically. So basically, because we are going to make use of symbols, notations, and other labels, no text labels on our visual representation or on our diagram, it is a need that we need to keep it as neat and clear as possible. Thus, we will learn about the different levels of the data flow diagram so that we can understand this better. But it says here that a neat and clear, may I just highlight this one? A neat and clear DFD, it can depict the right amount of the system requirement graphically. So the first thing that was discussed on this particular subject, the application development, is all about software or the system requirement specification, and then system requirement analysis, followed by the entity relationship diagram, and this one, the data flow diagram. So basically, we are going to start on this on specifying the particular requirements, and the data flow diagram will depict or will show or will represent those system requirements that was obtained not only from the customer but also the two-way process between the creator or the developer of the system and the customer per se. Okay? So basically, when we are talking about data flow diagram, we can do it manually, automated, or a combination of both. Okay, so that is for the answer on the first bullet. Okay, let's move on to the second bullet. It says here that it shows how data enters and leave the system. So basically, we have different elements. We have different elements for the data flow diagram that we can use to visually represent our data on our particular system. And we have these particular processes that we need to target, or we need to show on our DFD. The first one is how data enters. So these are the things that you need to show on your data flow diagram so that it will be as clear as possible. So it will show how data enters, how it leaves the system, and then the changes of the information, and where data is being stored. We all know that data is, or when we say data, these are raw facts, and when we say information, these are process data. So we have four things that we need to consider if we are going to build or create our data flow diagram. No, we have to show them how data enters, how it leaves the system, what changes the information, and where data is being stored. This is also connected on the different elements used on DFD. Okay, let's move on. So a data flow diagram maps out the flow of information. We have the term map. So when we say map, diba, we have the location, we have directions on or the visual representation of all the locations on a particular place. So DFD is also the same as that because it maps out the flow. Okay, let's consider the term flow of information for any process or system. And then, as I've said earlier, it uses defined symbols. What are the symbols that we can use later on? Ano yung mga symbols na we can obtain or we can use in creating data flow diagrams? So we have, you can see later on, rectangles. We also have circles. We can also, we will also use arrows, and then let us not forget the short labels, okay, or text labels. And we are going to show the data inputs, the data outputs, the storage points, and the routes between each destination. So basically, these are just the major symbols that we can use, but there are labels, or there are also labels and arrows that we should include later on our DFD. And then the one thing, or the things that we need to target is that you're going to show the inputs, outputs, storage points, and the routes between destination using the defined symbols or the different symbols. As you can see, the second bullet here is also quite the same as the third bullet. And then the fourth bullet was the explanation why data flow diagram says that it is a traditional visual representation. So what we can see here below is an example of a data flow diagram where it consists of the different symbols that we can use in creating a data flow diagram. But by merely looking at it, we cannot still understand it without knowing first the symbols that we are going to use and how are they going to be used on our data flow diagram. So I just want you to take a look at this example. As you can see, it has arrows, labels, and also shapes that we can use later on our DFD. I will be explaining each one of them as well as the uses of these symbols, so do not worry. Okay, moving on. We also have the history of the DFD, but this is only a brief history of the data flow diagram. So the data flow diagram, it was popularized in the late 1970s. So may I just highlight this one. Okay, arising from the book Structured Design by computing pioneers, we have Ed Jordan and Larry Constantine. So Ed Jordan and Larry Constantine are computing pioneers. Basically, they base it on the data flow graph computation models, which was being made by David Martin and Gerald Estrin. Okay, so the structured design concept took off in the software engineering field, and the data flow diagram method took off with it. So it became more popular in business circles as it was applied to business analysis than in academic circles. Okay, so in order for us to know better about the data flow diagram, we have also what we call the data flow diagram notations. So basically, we have two main types of DFD notations, which is also in connection or here on the history of the data flow diagram, especially Mr. Ed Jordan as one of the computing pioneers. Okay, so the two notations or the two main types of notations used for DFD are those that belongs to Jordan and Cowad. May I highlight this one? And we also have Gain and Sorson. So basically, Jordan is one of the computing pioneers alongside with Larry Constantine from the book Structured Design. So these are the two main types of notations, Jordan and Coad and Gain and Sarson. They are both named after their creators. So who are these people under these two main types of notations? So under Jordan and Coad, of course, we have Ed Jordan and we have Peter Coad. And then under Gain Sarson notation, we have Chris Gain and we also have Trish Sarson. So those are the pioneers or the creators of the two main types of notations, the Jordan Coad and Gain Sarson. So let us see later on what are the difference of these two main types of notations. Okay? So basically, all data flow diagrams include the following four main elements. So we have the entity, process, data store, and data flow, which I will be discussing each one later on. But let us focus first on the symbols and notations used in DFD. So as I've said, we have two main types of notations, the Jordan and Coad, and then the Gain and Sarson. So what are the difference of the two? So one main difference in their symbol is that in Jordan Coad and Jordan DeMarco use circles for processes. So as you can see, no, for processes daw, the Jordan and Coad uses the circles to represent, okay, or to represent it, while here on the Gain and Sarson, it uses the symbol rectangles with rounded corners. We all know that rectangles has sharp edges, but here on Gain and Sarson, it uses rectangles with rounded corners. And then sometimes it is also called as lozenges. Okay, so there are other symbol variations in use as well. So the important thing to keep in mind is to be clear and consistent in the shapes and notations you use to communicate and collaborate with others. So basically, since we have two main types of notations to be used, these two main types of notations also uses different symbols to represent the data flow diagram. So you only need to choose one. You need not to choose two, or you need not to use the two main types of notation, so that the audience or your client later on will not have a confusion, no? So isa lang po dapat ang kailangan nating piliin doon sa mga notations. If you're going to make use of the Jordan and Coad, then go and use the symbols. And then if you would like also to make use of the Gain and Sarson, you should also use the symbols intended for that particular notation, but you cannot use them both. Okay? It says here that using any conventions of DFD rules or guidelines, the symbols depict the four components of data flow diagrams. These four components can also be known as four elements. So here are the four elements or the four components of data flow diagram. It starts with the external entity or entity. We also have process. We also have data store, and we also have the data flow. So I am going to discuss each one of them and differentiate and know kung ano ba yung mga pwede nating gamitin or pwede nating include later on here on our four components or four elements. So basically, as I've said earlier, DFD is somewhat the same with the entity relationship diagram because, of course, they are used for visual representation of the data that is flowing or moving inside our system. But there are also similarities when it comes to the different components. So here, the ERD has also an entity as well as the DFD, but we also call it the external entity. So when we say external entity, it is an outside system that sends or receives data. I repeat, it is an outside system that sends or receives data. And then, by communicating with the system being diagram. So basically, they are the sources and destination of information. Okay, may I just highlight this one? So these are the things that the external entity produces, or the job of the external entity. Nagbibigay daw sila, or they send, and then they will be the one to receive the data that will be processed later on. And then they are also the sources and destination of the information entering or leaving the particular system. So they might be an outside organization or person. So take note of this one. They can be an outside organization, or they can be a particular person. They can also be a computer system or a business system. And of course, do not forget this, they are also known as the terminators, the sources, and things, or the actors. So we all know that when we say actors or actresses, they are the main point of a particular movie. Same as a data flow diagram, the external entity are the main actors of this. Okay, so they are typically drawn on the edges of the diagram. So take note that external entity are drawn on the edges of the diagram. And then external entities, or the entities, are also being represented by nouns. So for example, na mga nouns na pwedeng natin magamit sa ating external entity, it can be student, teacher, books, just like our entity relationship diagram. Okay? And then we also have the process. So any process that changes the data and producing an output is what we call the process element or the process component. So basically, it translates from input to output data, no? And then it might perform, what are the things that the process performs? Computations, or sort data based on logic, or direct the data flow based on the business rules. So basically, to gain more understanding about this one, the process should take place, or will take place, based on the processes of a particular system. So for example, on our process, you may include those words with verb, no? If we are talking about entity, we may use noun, but here on the process, we may use verbs. So for example, we have this one, submit payment. So we are going to make use of verb, the word submit. So we can also use manage, issue, return. Those things, or those words, can also be used on process. Okay? And then we also have the data store, which are files or repositories. So may I just highlight this one? These are files or repositories that hold information for later use, such as database table or membership form. But basically, yung usually naglalagay, or the usual thing that we put on our data store, are those database tables. So for example, we will have TBL student, or TBL teacher, TBL employee. Those are the things, or the repositories, or what we call the databases that we use on our system. Okay, so you are going to include it on data store, and each data store receives a simple label such as orders. So for example, something like that, orders. The orders are being saved on a particular repository, no? So that is under the data store. And lastly, we have the data flow, which we also may pertain as the route. Okay? Okay, the route that data takes between the external entities, processes, and data store. So class, you need to understand that the external entity, the process, and data store are interconnected with the use of data flow. And this data flow is also using arrows in order to depict the flow of the data. Okay, so it portrays the interface between the other components and is shown with arrows, typically labeled with a short data name. For example, are billing details. But I will be showing you later on how to use the different elements on a particular data flow diagram. Okay, so those are the different components or elements of DFD: the external entity, the process, the data store, and the data flow. Okay, so here I would like to show the difference between gain and Sarson, especially to the symbols or the shapes used in order to create a data flow diagram. So here we have the Jordan and Quad, and then gain and Sarson, whereas we also have the external entity, the process, data store, and then the data flow. So for the external entity, pink for Jordan and Quad, and we also have purple for gain and Sarson here. So it uses a shape or rectangle shape with a soft edge, and then we also have the circle for process for the Jordan and Quad, and we also have a rectangle or a square, I should say, shape, curve or soft shape, soft edged shape. Okay, so with a line at the middle, and then we also have for data store, as you can see, meron din siyang line dito sa left side niya, and same as the data flow. So as you can see, no, they only differ on the process and then the data store. And then if you are going to include a label on the different symbols, it should be like this. So basically, at the top of the gain and Sarson, you should include number and then point something, which is 0. And then if you are going to include another one or another process, you should also put 2.0, something like that. And as you can see, you can also do that on the Jordan and Quad, same as the different symbols. So here are the different symbols used for the two notations, the gain and Sarson and the Jordan and Quad. Okay, moving on. We also have, okay, so in order to create a neat and clear data flow diagram, you need to have these rules and tips that we need to follow. So one, each person should have at least, or each process should have at least one input and an output. So let us just highlight this one. Each process, no? Each process should have at least one input and an output, which will be shown using the data flow or the arrows later on. And then each data store should have at least one data flow, okay, or data flow in and one data flow out. This is also same as the first one, no? So each process should have at least one input and an output, which is being represented by an arrow, and also the data store should have at least one data flow in and one data flow out. And then the data stored in a system must go through a process. So the data store is connected to a particular process, and all processes, may I just highlight this one, okay, all processes in DFD go to another process or to a data store. So basically, they are all interconnected with each other. So one process should have input and output. One or all of the data store should have one data flow in or one data flow out. And data store should have or should go through a process, and all processes in DFD go to another process or a data store. They are all interconnected with each other. So to understand this better, we have here the data flow diagram levels that also gives or applies the different tips or different rules set here on our copy. Okay, so the different data flow diagram levels include level 0, level 1, and level 2. And we also have level 3, but it is not already it is not widely used because it may make your data flow diagram more complicated and unclear. Okay, so it says here that data flow diagrams are also categorized by different levels, and starting with the most basic, which is the level 0. So the data flow diagrams get increasingly complex as the level increases. So we have to keep this in mind, that as DFDs get increasingly complex as the level increases. So as I've said a while ago, we also have level 3, but as the level increases, nagiging complicated yung ating data flow diagram and it is very difficult to create, and later on it will be unclear. So hanggang level 2 lang yung maximum na mostly ginagamit natin. Okay, and then as you build your own data flow diagram, you will need to decide which level your diagram will be later on. Okay, so let's start with the level 0 DFDs or data flow diagram, or also known as context diagram. So the other term for level 0 is the context diagram. So the symbol that we are going to use, or the notation that we are going to use, is under Jordan and Coad, as you can see. Okay, so to verify, let us see if it's Jordan and Coad. Yes. So Jordan and Coad uses circles for their processes. So same as the level 0 here, or the context diagram. Okay, so the level 0 is the most basic because it's the first one, no? It is the most basic, and then it requires broad view or general view. And as you can see, it requires a little detail. Okay, so we only have one or a single process or a node here, which is the hotel reservation, and we also have two entities here, which are our external entities. We have the guest and the admin. So may I just read this one? The level 0 DFDs, or also known the context diagrams, are the most basic data flow diagrams, and they provide a broad view that is easily digestible but offers little detail. So that is also the downfall of the level 0 DFD, because it offers little detail about the intake or the flow of the data on our particular system. And the level 0 data flow diagram show a single process node and its connection to external entities. So as I've said, the level 0 is the most basic, and then the view is broad or in general. It requires little detail or shows little detail, and it only has single process. You need to keep in mind that level 0 only needs one process, no? Okay, so here on our example, we have the node or the one process, which is the hotel reservation. We have two entities, guest and then admin, and as you can see, it has also the different data flows here. Okay, so it shows the entire process and not the not all its details. Okay, it is only limited, so it has limited representation of how data moves, because as you can see, no, we only have two entities here on the level 0. So the guest, as you can see, we have the guest has two data flow towards the process, which are the fill reservation form and also the fill cancellation form. So it's very limited, and the process, which is the hotel reservation, will return one data flow to the guest, which is the room info. And then here on our admin, it has one data flow towards the process, which is up down hotel info, and then for the process, it has two data flow towards the admin, which are the reservation or cancellation info, and then the guest info. By merely looking at it, it's very simple. The details are not that intricate, the details are not that many for us to represent our system. So that is for the level 0 DFD or the context diagram. Okay, we also have, maybe proceed on the level 1 DFDs. Okay, so level 1 DFD is also a general view, but it has more details than the level 0 DFD. So as you can see here on the visual representation, okay, so here on the visual representation, we have a process, which is, or the main process, or the single process, or we call the node, which is the hotel reservation. But as you can see, it is broke down into different sub-process. Yun yung difference ng ating level 0 and then level 1. Here, our level on our level 0, isa lang po yung need niya na process. But here on our level 1, we can break down the process, the hotel reservation on different sub-processes. So, ano ba yung mga different sub-processes niya? We have room selection, we have report to admin, and we also have inquiry. So, take note lang, no? In having the level 1 data flow diagram, as the process are added, as you can see, we have the room selection, report to admin, and inquiry. So forgive me for having a background noise because I am recording this at night. So we cannot also avoid those background noises, especially the dogs on my background. So please bear with me. Okay, so here, as I've said, take note that as the processes are, or the sub-processes are added, okay, it needed more or additional data flows and data stores to link them. So as you can see, now we have additional 3 sub-processes on the hotel reservation. We have the room selection, report to admin, and inquiry. And then there are also additional arrows or the data flows that we need. And then, as you can see, it is being linked to the different, to the data stores, okay, here, which are the reservation storage. We also have the down storage. We also have the up storage. And we only have one entity, which is the guest. Okay, so that is for the level 1 data flow diagram. Although it is not that detailed, but it is better, or the detailing is better than the level 0, because level 0 is very broad. But here, there are the process that was given is being also breakdown or broken down into sub-processes. Okay, so that is for level 1. And then we also have level 2, DFD. Okay, so under level 2, DFD, it breaks down processes into more detailed sub-processes. So as the level increases, there are more details that are added here on our data flow diagram. Okay, so for example, the reservation process is broken down to another process or sub-processes, and there are more data flow and data stores to interconnect them. So as you can see now, we have 6 sub-processes under the main process or main node reservation process. So we have searching, we also have confirmation, we have room selection, cancellation, we have hotel, and we also have the query process. Okay, so those are the sub-processes under the main process reservation process. We also have the 6 data stores. We have the reservation, we also have report, and then we also have here reservation, waiting table, cancel table. We also have reservation here, and another entity which is also a guest. And as you can see, all of the data flows are interconnected with each other. So going back here on our tips and then the rules and tips, it was being implemented, no, that each process should have at least one input and an output. Data store should have one data flow and data flow in and one data flow out, and data stored should go through a process, and all processes in DFD go to another process or a data store. So it is being implemented here on our examples or the levels of data flow diagrams. As you can see, no, more sub-processes, more data stores, only one entity, but as you can see, we have a lot of data flows that are present here. So we have in and out of data here on guest and query process, also here on the confirmation. So all of the tips and then the guidelines in creating a data flow diagram is also being applied here on the level 2 data flow diagram. So those are the different levels. We have the level 0, level 1, and level 2, but we can also have level 3, but it will be more complicated later on. Okay? Okay, so how to create a data flow diagram. So these are just the things that you need to consider in creating a diagram. Although it has a lot. We have 5, I think. But I will just have to list, or I will just have to read them so that we can also gain more understanding on the different things that we need to do on how to create a data flow diagram. So number 1, identify major inputs and outputs in your system. Okay, so nearly every process or system begins with input from an external entity and ends with the output of data to another entity or database. So we have to keep in mind that every process begins with input from an external entity. That is why we say that the external entity is the actor, no? It's the main point of our data flow diagram. And also, it ends with the output of data to another entity. So from one entity to another, or from one entity to another database. Okay, so identifying such inputs and outputs gives a macro view of your system, and it shows the broadest task the system should achieve, and the rest of your DFD will be built on these elements, so it is crucial to know them early on. So first that you're going to do, know your inputs and outputs. Okay, next one, you need to build a context diagram. So we all know that, as I've made mention a while ago, that the context diagram is also known the level 0 DFD. Okay, so once you've identified the major inputs and outputs, it is now time to build a context diagram, which is very simple. You need to draw a single process node, which is being applied on the level 0 DFD a while ago, and connect it to the related entity. So we only need a one node and two particular entities, and then you are going to draw later on the data flow or using arrows. And this node represents the most general process information undergoes to go from input to outputs. For example, now, the information, how information flows between various entities via an online community. So the data flows to and from the external entities representing both input and output. And the central node, for example, we have the online community, is the general process. But in order for us to understand this better, let's just go back here on our level 0. This is an example on how you are going to create your context diagram. Okay, so that is for the level number 2. Okay, and then for number 3, you need to expand the data, the context diagram. Thus, you are now going to create your level 1. More details, but although it is in general view, mas marami pa siyang details, and yung nag-iisang entity mo kanina, i-breakdown mo into sub-processes. So that is for number 3. And number 4, of course, you need to expand it in more detailed form. So we already know the differences between level 0, level 1, and level 2. That is why in creating a data flow diagram, you should also take into consideration the different levels, because they are also included here on the different steps on how to create a particular data flow diagram. So you need to expand a level 2 plus DFD. It says here, to enhance the detail of your data flow diagram, follow the same process as in step 3, and the process in your level 1 DFD can be broken down into more specific sub-processes. So going back again, so to understand this more, okay, so you can see yung hotel reservation natin, no? It was broken down here on our level 1, which is in number 3. It was being broken down, and then as the level increases, mas madami pang mga sub-processes ang nilagay dito sa level 2. Okay, and then it says here that level 3 data flow diagrams are detailed enough that it doesn't usually make sense to break them down further. Okay, so so hanggang level 2 lang mostly yung ginagamit natin. And lastly, you need to confirm the accuracy of your final diagram. And when your diagram is completely drawn, walk through it and pay close attention to the flow of information. So does it make sense? Are all necessary data stores included? Or by looking at your final diagram, other parties should be able to understand the way your system functions. And before presenting your final diagram, you should check with coworkers to ensure your diagram is comprehensible. That's why the very first thing on the first bullet that we answered, no, kanina, kung what is data flow diagram, nilagay niya, you need to have a neat and clear data flow diagram. So yan po yung sinasabi ng ating number 5. It must be accurate enough and it must be clear for other people to see, kasi hindi lang naman ikaw yung gagamit. And you also need to make sure that the flow of data is being well represented using the data flow diagram that you are going to create later on. Okay, so we have here, so those are the things that you need to consider in creating a data flow diagram. We have here an example of a data flow diagram using the gain and Sarson notation. Okay, so last time, the different levels of data flow diagram that was being given uses the other notation, the Jordan and Coad. Ngayon, gagamit naman tayo ng gain and Sarson. So basically, as you can see, no, here we have the different elements or different components in data flow diagram. So for entity or the external entity, we are going to make use of nouns, gaya na sabi ko kanina. So where are the external entity here on our sample? So the external entities are, for example, we have the librarian here, we also have the student, we also have the book, ayan, or book. So we have three external entities. Okay, so they are the starting point. They are the main actors, the librarian, the student, and the books. And we also have the process, which is being represented by verbs. So for example, we have manage books, issue book, manage students, return book. Okay, so those are the different process. And we also have this login. Okay, and then we also have data store. So the data stores can be the table of your database. So here on our sample, the data stores are administrative table, user login, student table, and then a book table, issue table, and then the return table. So those are the examples of our data store. And as you can see, we have a lot of data flow here, or the arrows that interconnect with each other. So the arrows here that was included here on our examples answers the question, what will happen after the process is being applied. Okay, so it usually represents the in and out of the particular data. So as you can see now, let's start with the librarian. For example, the librarian will input the login details, ayan, and then we'll have a confirmation, and then the login will send information to the database user login or to the data store user login, and after it was being saved on the user login, it will return a flow, or the data will flow. It will say that login is being successful. Okay, let us also use the book, no? How about the book? So for example, the book will return a data on the status update. So under the process, return book, and then the process will now go to the data store, which is return table. The information or the data that will be given or that will be saved on the return table will be the student ID and book title. And after that, the return table will return to the process return book, which also give the data student details, which will be updated. So that is how you are going to create or an example of the gain and Sarson data flow diagram. So as you can see, no, all of the process are being included here, and take note, meron siya mga different labels here that we can use. We have 1.0, 2.0, and 3.0, 4.0, and 5.0. And also the different data stores here, they also have labels. So please do not forget, if we are dealing about entity or external entities, please make use of nouns. And if we are using processes just like this one, please use verbs also. And then on the data flow, you should also use some text labels, simple labels that shows or discusses what will happen next, or the in and out of the data. And for our data store, you should also put the table of your database. Okay, so that is the sample, gain, and Sarson. So I hope you can also make your own data flow diagram later on. Just base it on the database, no, of your particular system. Okay, so here, to understand this better, especially the context data flow diagram and the level 1, we have here an example which is a food ordering system. So before that, may I just use this one. May I just copy paste the actual data flow diagram here so that we can compare later on. Okay, so here, okay, so let's start here. So data flow diagram for a food ordering system. So this will be a basis later on if you are going to create your own data flow diagram for your system. Okay, so a context diagram, which is the level 0 of data flow diagram, is a DFD that only shows the top level, otherwise known as level 0. At this level, there is only one visible process. So always take note that the context diagram or the level 0 diagram only has one visible process node that represents the function of a complete system in regards to how it interacts with external entities. So some of the benefits, ito yung mga different benefits ng paggamit ng ating context diagram. So number 1, it shows the overview of the boundaries of a system, and no technical knowledge is required to understand with the simple notation, and simple to draw, amend, and elaborate as its limited notation. So yan naman yung kagandahan ng ating context data flow diagram, kasi kahit hindi ka naman ganun kagaling or kahit wala kang ganung background sa data flow diagram, you can always understand it because the notations used and the symbols used are very self-explanatory and simple lang kasi isang process at dalawang entities, maglalagay ka lang ng arrows just to show the flow of the data. Okay? So the figure below shows context diagram or context data flow diagram, which is drawn for a food ordering system. So it contains a process that represents the system to model, in this case, the food ordering system. So ito yung process natin. It uses the gain and source notation. Yung process natin is the food ordering system. You can also draw it like this one. Okay? So pwede lang na kahit hindi 1.0, something like that. You can also draw it like that. And it also shows the participants who will interact with the system, which is also called the external entities. Doon kasi sa level 0 natin kanina na pinakita ko, it uses the Jordan and Quad. Dito kasi it uses the gain and Sarson. Okay? So that is why magkaiba sila ng visual representation. Okay, and then in this example, we have the different entities. No, we have the supplier, we also have the kitchen, we also have the manager, and we also have the customer, which uses nouns. And then these are the entities who will interact with the particular system, the food ordering system. So in between the process and the external entities, there are data flow or connectors that indicate the existence of information exchange between the entities and the system. So as you can see, the arrow going towards the from the food ordering system towards the supplier, food ordering system, and towards the kitchen, food ordering system towards the manager, and the manager will also interact with the food ordering system, and the food ordering system will also interact with the customer, vice versa. We have two data flows here which has a vice versa data flow. Unlike the supplier and the kitchen, one-way process lang po siya. Okay, so the context DFD is the entrance of data flow model, and it contains one and only one process and does not show any data store. Wala po siyang data store. Tatlo lang po yung tatlo lang po yung present dito. We only have the process, the data flow, which are the arrows, and we also have the external entities. Okay? Whereas, dito sa ating level 1 DFD, okay, dito sa level 1 DFD, it is more detailed. As you can see, na breakdown siya, just like our example, no? Okay, so the figure below shows the level 1 DFD, which is the decomposition or what we call the breakdown of the food ordering system process shown in the context data flow diagram. Okay, so we are going to read through the diagram and then we'll introduce some of the key concepts. So a while ago, I already pasted the sample here. So i-minimize ko lang po ito so that we can see. Kasi scroll down ko po ito. Itong sample natin. Okay, something like that. Okay, so palakihin ko lang po ito. Okay. Okay, so as you can see here, we have at least 3 processes. We have order food, generate reports, and we also have order inventory. Okay, may I just fix this one? Okay. May I repeat? We have 3 processes. We have order food, generate reports, and then order inventory. We also have data store inventory here, and then order. We also have external entities, the customer, kitchen, manager, and supplier, and we also have arrows that represents the data flow. Okay, so as you can see, the food order system data flow diagram example contains 3 processes, 4 external entities, and 2 particular data stores. So based on the diagram here on the left side, we know that a customer can place a particular order. So where is the customer? We have here the customer. Okay, so the customer, we all know that the customer can place an order. That is why the data flow is going towards the process order food. Ayan, papunta siya doon sa process and meron siyang label na order. Okay, the order food process receives the order towards the kitchen. Okay, yun yung first process natin, no? Yung first process po natin is that yung customer, nag-start siya sa may customer. Yung customer daw, mag-o-order siya ng food. So, yung process doon yung order food. And yung order po natin, okay, yung order food process natin receives the order from the customer, and then it will forward the order to the kitchen. That is why the arrow is going towards the kitchen at meron din tayong label na order. Okay, and then the order here, okay, from the order process, it is stored in the order data store. Nandito siya. So, yung order na ginawa po ng ating customer, na-save siya dito sa my data store natin. Okay, and the process also delivers a bill to the customer. So, nung nakapag-order na siya, okay, it will also return a bill or deliver a bill to the customer. Okay, and after that, the manager here, okay, the manager na entity natin can also receive reports from the generate reports process. So, ito yung generate reports process natin. Okay, na-receive na siya or papunta siya doon sa manager kasi magre-receive siya ng mga reports. For example, yung mga report na yung monthly na ano nila, na profit nila, okay, yung mga transactions nila. So, those are examples of reports. So, from the generate reports process, papunta siya sa manager kasi magbibigay nga siya or magpiprint out siya ng mga reports or ng mga files later on. Through the generate reports process, which takes inventory details and orders as input from the inventory. So, we have here the inventory details. Okay, yung generate reports kasi natin, no, bago siya magbigay ng report sa manager, meron tayong mga inventory details. Ito yung mga nasa loob ng ating generate reports or yung process na ikukunin niya. So, yung dalawang data store natin na under ng generate reports, we have the inventory and we also have the order. So, yung inventory na data store natin, magpo-forward siya ng mga inventory details as well as the order na magpo-forward siya doon sa process na generate reports and then ibibigay niya sa my manager. And then yung manager po, magi-initiate siya ng order inventory. Okay, so yung process natin ng order inventory by providing a inventory order and the process towards the inventory order to the supplier. Ayan, so from the manager, okay, pwede siyang mag-provide ng inventory order papunta sa process na order inventory, and from the process order inventory, ipo-forward niya sa supplier natin and stores the updated inventory details in the inventory data store. So basically, papunta rin siya dito sa my inventory. So, itong example natin, no, the example here is an example na they are interconnected with each other, no? They are level 1, although hindi siya ganun ka-detalye, but you can see how data flows here. So all of the entities are also interconnected with each other with the use of the different processes. Just like this one, the customer orders food. The food is being forwarded to the kitchen. From the process ng pag-order ng food, it was being saved on the inventory na data store and also the order data store. And then yung inventory data store details natin na i-forward siya sa process na generating of reports, also the order here. And then i-forward niya sa manager. And yung manager natin, okay, he can also make use, or he can also process the inventory order. Okay, so meron tayong order inventory here which will be given to the supplier. And then yung process natin ng order inventory will be given or will be forwarded again yung mga details niya dito sa inventory data store. So it's just like a cycle, an ending cycle. It represents a food ordering system. So lahat po ng mga processes they are all interconnected with each other. So nasa sa atin na po. That is why we need to gain more understanding on the system bago tayo mag-create ng ating data flow diagram. And we should also know the inputs and outputs of our system. So by using this as a basis, we can now create a simple na data flow diagram later on, as long as alam nyo yung mga process. Okay? So, we also have here, may I just show you, we also have here tips and cautions. May I just read this one? So, this will be the final thing that I'm going to discuss. Okay, you need to process labels, or the process label should be verb phrases, and then data stores are also represented by nouns. A data store must be associated to at least a process, which is also the same as the guidelines or the rules that was included earlier. A data store must be associated to at least a process. An external entity must be associated to at least a process. And then don't let it get too complex. Normally 5 to 7 average people can manage processes. And DFD is non-deterministic. So the numbering does not necessarily indicate sequence, and it's useful in identifying the processes when discussing with users. So data store should not be connected to an external entity, or otherwise it would mean that you're giving an external entity direct access to your data files. And data flows should not exist between two external entities without going through a particular process. So yung dalawang entities, for example, entity ng student at teacher, hindi mo pwedeng i-interconnect yun sa dalawa. Hindi po pwede. So, for example, sige, maglalagay po tayo ng example. So, for example, ito po yung kay student. And then, we also have here for the teacher. So, hindi tayo pwedeng maglagay ng ating data flow na ganyan na directly. So, lagi po tayo maglalagay dapat ng ating process sa gitna. So, parang sa entity relationship diagram, meron siyang diamond sa gitna. Okay? So, ganun po, hindi po tayo pwedeng mag-connect po yan. Sabi niya dito, data flow should not exist between two external entities without going through a particular process. And a process that has inputs but no outputs is considered to be a black hole process. Okay? So, those are the things or the tips in creating, or the cautions that we should consider in creating the data flow diagram. So those are the topics or the brief discussion about the data flow diagram, or what we call the DFD. Okay, so I hope we understood something. But if you have any questions, if you have any thing to clarify, if you want clarifications on the data flow diagram, do not hesitate to ask me, and I will try my best to answer them. And I would also like to apologize to the background noise that you are experiencing while watching this video, because we cannot those background noises are natural causes, so hindi natin maiiwasan yan. Please bear with me, and my apologies for that disturbance. Okay, so I hope you learned something today. I hope you will use it for your learning. I hope you will use them later on in creating your data flow diagram. So thank you so much, good day, and God bless.